Good evening, I'm Nick. It is Friday, November 8th, 2019, and this is my recap of the 2019 New York City Marathon. So I've got a pretty big goal of running all the Abbott World Majors. So I need 6 races: Chicago, Boston, New York, Berlin, London, and Tokyo. So I've had this goal probably for, I don't know, maybe since I ran Chicago in 2017 and realized kind of what the Abbott World Majors was, and kind of set a goal to do it then, knowing that Boston would probably be pretty difficult to get into. Didn't really know about New York at the time, but so my main goal was Boston, which I was able to do earlier this year, and have a video on that I've already published. So anyway, getting into New York actually was a little more challenging than getting into Boston. The time qualifications for the marathon for my age group is 2 hours 55 minutes, and up to this point my PR had been 3 hours and I think 54 seconds. So I hadn't quite hit that goal, but last year in 2018, I did run a half marathon in 1:24:35, and it just happened that for the New York City Marathon, you can enter a half marathon time for time qualification. The math really worked out in my favor, because the time to run under an hour and 25 minutes at a half marathon to qualify was for those people over 40, for men over 40. And so it just happened that my birthday falls on Halloween, and so the way it worked out was the race this year was on November 3rd, so 4 days prior I turned 40, and so I was able to use that time qualification I got from the half marathon in Springfield, Illinois, to put my name in the lottery in January of 2019, earlier this year. So I don't remember how long the sign-up process lasts for the New York City Marathon. I believe it's 30 days. I think I signed up, put my name in and my time in early January, and then I think by the end of January I had heard that I had indeed been accepted into the New York City Marathon. Very stoked for this. A little nervous because I had Boston coming up at that point in a few months, and the expense of these big marathons, especially in cities like Boston and New York, is pretty high, and so I was a little anxious about that. But when else was I going to be able to qualify for this race and do it? So signed up for it, and pretty quickly got onto the airfare and booked our airfare and our hotel as well, just to get that all taken care of and set up. So there was no backing out at that point. So ended up running Boston again. I've got another report on that. And after Boston, I ended up taking a little bit of time off. I had some nagging injuries that I had gotten in 2018, plantar fasciitis that had really bothered me. It took probably about 8 months to finally get over. And so I took a little bit of time off after Boston. And I also ended up doing an endurance fit class, which was a strength training class. It was met a couple days a week for about 16 weeks. And so that really helped me as well. So I took a month off. I was doing that, and then I started back up with some light running in June. And I had done the Hanson's Marathon method to qualify for Boston in 2018. So I had decided to go back to that. I had looked at some other plans with some higher mileages, but I had pretty quickly determined that because of my foot injury, to get up to the higher mileages, it was going to be probably pushing my body a little too hard in this cycle. So I decided to go back to what I had known, and to understand the plan. I didn't have to start from scratch with a brand new plan. I did tweak the plan a little bit. I changed my goal kind of in the first few weeks. I had planned to do like a 2:55 time, and once I saw kind of how I was progressing in some of the early workouts, I decided to shoot for the 2:50, 2 hours 50-minute time frame. So again, I think I started the training it was early July, so I'd had some summer races. I'm part of a racing team, and we've got some races that we are kind of required to do. So I got through some of those. I really didn't do that great with some of these summer races because I had been injured and I had really taken that time off from running, and I hadn't done any speed work probably since 2018. I don't think I did really any speed work early 2019, so I knew that I was my fitness was off a little bit. But getting back into the Hanson plan, I knew that would pick my fitness back up. So I started again in early July and eased into the program with that 2 hour and 50-minute goal in mind. The plan is challenging, but you only top out at about 60 miles per week, and that's later in the training plan. But it does force you to run some pretty hard tempo runs, kind of marathon pace runs. The track workouts are pretty difficult. I'm not a huge fan of the track in terms of, I know it's good for me, but I just don't really like it. It's, running around the track is kind of monotonous for me, and it really does push me pretty hard. So it's just a difficult place for me in my head as well. So I got through the track workouts, and then you end up going through some interval training where you do 6 by 1 mile at a certain pace, and then you go to 3 by 2 mile, and then 2 by 3 mile, and then you kind of come back down. Meanwhile, you're increasing your mileage on those tempo runs up to about 10 miles towards the end. So throughout the training block, I felt really good physically. Like the plantar fasciitis had kind of gone away. Like anybody in some of these training plans, I had some stuff that I could feel in my body. I could feel the training, and I could feel some small little things. But the Hanson plan is great, especially the second time through. Like I said, just understanding what I was up against, but also knowing that it kind of pushes you right up to the edge of injury before you get injured. So you really got to make sure you kind of hold back and don't push it too hard. But one thing I did was I did adjust some of my easier runs and pushed a little bit harder, especially the longest you go on the plan is 16 miles. So I really tried to mimic kind of that last 6 miles of a marathon by picking up my pace in the last 4 to 6 miles of those runs on tired legs. So it's 6 days a week, so you do get that, they call it cumulative fatigue. So as I got closer to the marathon, like I said, was feeling very good. And so the run up to the marathon was good. The week before, we had a lot going on. We had kind of a family medical emergency that kind of distracted me, but was very focused on the race and knew what I had to do. In my head, I was mentally prepared, and my body was prepared. I felt really good for this marathon. I felt really prepared. So our trip, we left on Friday morning, and we got to New York a little before noon, so it was kind of an early morning flight. And so we took a car into Manhattan, and we ended up staying at a hotel in the theater district. I wanted to stay kind of close to the finish line in Central Park, knowing that after a marathon, I want to be kind of close to where we're staying, because I know I get tired. I really want to get back and take a shower. That's kind of like priority number one. And then kind of settle down a little bit and then get some food. So we stayed at, I think it was 54th Street and 8th Avenue, that area. So pretty close to the finish line up in Central Park. So we got in Friday, had a kind of a late lunch, and then we walked down to the Javits Center, which is where the expo was. It was really neat. The expo was obviously different than Chicago or Boston, but the same kind of number of people and just the size. New Balance had a huge area. I didn't see a lot of other like shoe companies there. I think New Balance must have kind of pushed everybody else out. But we walked around the expo, and I'm looking down at my watch, my Garmin, and realizing that my step count was getting kind of high. So I told my wife that we really needed to kind of head back to the hotel, and so we hiked to a few blocks to a subway station, and took the subway back up. That saved us probably 5-6 blocks of walking. I had dinner that night at an awesome dim sum restaurant near our hotel, about a 10-minute walk. And then Saturday, I decided after all that walking on Friday that I really needed to stay in the hotel room and just relax. I would really urge anybody doing these big marathons and wanting to do them for a time to try to take it easy the day of the race. My wife and I had actually been lucky enough to travel out to New York City together in late June. I had done a little running, but we did a lot of the touristy things. We saw a couple of Broadway shows. We went down to the World Trade Center site. I'm so glad that we were able to do that in June because this was a very short trip, and the main focus was the marathon. With my goal of trying to run a 250 marathon Saturday, I needed to take it easy. So I stayed in our hotel room a majority of the day. My wife was awesome. She brought me coffee and a bagel in the morning. And I'm an intermittent faster as well. But up to the marathon that kind of week before, I decided that I was going to kind of start breaking that fast earlier than I normally do at noon every day. So I was eating a little bit earlier just because I needed the calories and the carbohydrates. So Saturday was a restful day. We actually had a couple friends also running the race from where we live, so we ended up meeting them at Nobu 57. It's a sushi place. Had a really nice dinner with them, and then back to the room and try to get to sleep at about 9 o'clock. So Sunday morning, race day, and the race logistics, like Boston, it's a point-to-point race. So there were a couple of choices when we first signed up. When I first signed up for the race, one being take a bus from the New York City Public Library, or you could make your way down to like southern Manhattan and take the Staten Island ferry across, and then get on a bus there and take that to Fort Wadsworth, which is where in Staten Island where the race begins. I decided to take the bus because it was fairly close to the hotel. And I just figured logistically I could get on the bus, ride the bus, they drop you right off at Fort Wadsworth. So there was no get on a boat, take a subway, get on a boat, get off the boat, get on a bus, get off the bus. It just seemed a lot easier to do the bus all the way. So I got up at 4:30, took a couple of Lara bars. I'm a big fan of those. They digest easily and I eat a lot of them normally, so I knew that wouldn't be a problem. No coffee really that morning. I took a bottle of water with me and headed down through Times Square. It was really neat. It was early, but there were a lot of marathoners out kind of heading down to the public library. So I saw a bunch of people out walking down, and it's very bright in Times Square. So it was really neat. Not a lot of people out again, so it's kind of quiet that early in the morning, but it's still dark, even though we had turned the clocks back the night before. So that was, again, something that I had to kind of get used to, and I did wake up in the middle of the night hoping to make sure that my watch was set properly, and it wasn't, so luckily I fixed that early in the evening. But anyway, got down to the bus area. It was pretty crowded. They had it fenced, kind of barriered off, so you had to enter. Reminded me kind of entering like an amusement park ride. You kind of had to go down to the southern, I don't know what cross street that is, but the southern end of the library, and enter through a barrier. And then it went pretty fast. I got there at about 20 to 6. My bus time was 6. I think there was a 5 a.m. or a 6 a.m. bus, and I decided to take the later bus. But we got onto the bus pretty quickly, and I got on, and right up front behind the driver, there was a woman sitting there, and there was an empty seat. So I just plopped down, and we ended up chatting for the whole bus ride. So it was a nice woman from Buffalo, New York. It was her first marathon, which, wow, New York being your first marathon, it's kind of that's a big one. So we talked, had a nice chat the whole way. It took like an hour, maybe hour and 15 minutes to get to the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, and then we waited and waited. And meanwhile, I had like chugged this bottle of water, and like my bladder's starting to get full. I'm so glad I didn't drink coffee or have any caffeine. I probably wouldn't have made it. But we ended up just sitting, and like I wasn't really sure where we were going to be getting off the bus, because we kind of were pulling around like a curve. Finally, after we get off the bridge, it was a stop and go for quite a while. Like this whole process took 2 hours, so I think we ended up in that stop and go for a good 30 to 40 minutes. We finally get dropped off. I tell this woman good luck, and I jet out because I had to go to the bathroom. I had to pee really bad. So get off the bus, kind of navigate through some of the buses, because there's like 2 or 3 lanes of buses, and people are getting off. The bus drivers weren't really sure where to let us off, but I was just glad to be off the bus. And I hiked it over to the area where we kind of had to walk up to a security. So you had to go through a metal detector. They allowed you to carry the clear plastic bag that they gave us at the expo with any items we had. So I brought an extra pair of shoes, not knowing how muddy or how trampled down things would be. And in Boston this year, we had been warned about how messy and how it could ruin your shoes. Again, you can read or view my report from that. So I was a little concerned about that, but it wasn't so bad. I'm still glad I wore an old pair of shoes up to that point, but I had my newer pair of shoes that I was going to wear for the race. Like my goo was in there, and then I had a couple other things. I had like a pair of gloves like that we had bought at Dwayne Reed for cheap, just so I could throw them, because I didn't think I was going to need gloves the whole race. The temperatures actually were awesome. It was going to be in the low 50s, a bit breezy, but the sun was out, so it was great. So get into Athletes Village, and I'm looking for a porta pot, and there's lines everywhere. Unfortunately, maybe good advice for New York is to get there early. Take the 5 a.m. bus. I had seen that kind of prior on a video. I had already signed up for the 6 a.m. bus, but it just gave you more time. Ended up, I really didn't have a lot of time in the village, which I guess that was the flip side. That wasn't so bad. It was I didn't have to wait around so much. But I did finally get to use the porta pot. I had to wait probably 10-15 minutes to get to use the porta pot. I did like Boston because they had porta urinals. So we didn't have to wait for people that were doing number 2. Which I didn't have to do. I was all good in that aspect. I generally tried to eat knowing not a lot of fiber the day before a race or the few days before a race, so I generally haven't had a lot of digestive issues coming up to a race. So after going to the bathroom, I ended up kind of walking over to my stall area, and I had brought my goo with me, so I ended up safety pinning my goo to my waistband of my running shorts, and I flip it inside. I saw that online. It really worked well for me this race. I have carried them in pockets before. It really hadn't worked. If you load your back pocket, I wear Saucony gear, and a lot of times Saucony just has a back right pocket, and if you load that with like 4 goos, like it just bounces all over the place until you end up getting like 1 or 2 left. So wasn't really hip to that this time. So I did that, kind of figured out my gear situation, and by this time the corral was opening up, so I was in the green corral in the first group. So I enter in, and there's porta pots in the corral, and so I end up waiting, just getting in line in a porta pot, knowing that, hey, it's just good to maybe pee one more time. So a lot of the people in my line were not peeing. So, hey, whatever, floats your boat, or whatever. But I ended up finally getting up to the front, and it was good. I'm glad I did get to use the porta pot one more time. And then it was a waiting game. We had probably about a half hour or so to wait. So I kind of made my way up to the front of the corral, and eventually was able to strip off my Goodwill clothes and get situated. It was a little chilly, but the sun being out helped keep me a little bit warm. But then it was maybe a half-mile walk up to the start line. So I kind of did some strides as much as I could and just tried to get a little loose. Get up to the front, and again, it's more waiting, like it always is for some of these big marathons. So get up to the front. I'm feeling pretty good. Got everything. We're within 15 minutes to start, so I take my first goo and just kind of wait. And we had heard and seen some other groups go off, especially the elites, and so a big cannon goes off, and then they play Frank Sinatra, New York, New York. So we're inching closer to 9:40, which is our start time, and we do a God Bless America, and there's police helicopters everywhere. The security was incredible. I mean, I didn't see a lot, but I knew they were there. So the cannon goes off, and we're off, and I'm probably, 40, 50 people deep, by the time it's all said and done in terms of this corral. So I had no business being up front. So the first mile is up the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, and we're on the bottom deck. So I was a little disappointed. I knew that going into this. You really couldn't see the skyline very well, the Manhattan skyline. But what are you going to do? People have been talking about people urinating over the side of the bridge. There was none of that. I didn't see any of that. And it was hard to navigate through the people. I really ran way too slow of a split that first mile. But the way I figure a marathon, a lot of times that first mile is like a warm-up, because there's nowhere to do a warm-up in these big marathons like this. So my first mile was 7:40, which wasn't all that great. But I hit the crest, come down, and I'm 6 minutes coming down the hill. So the Green Corral, because we go down underneath the bridge, you end up, the first 3 miles are a different course than the orange and the blue corrals. So we all kind of end up after about 3 miles, end up kind of seeing the group ahead. I remember making a left turn, and we could see a couple blocks down the number of people kind of running by. And so I knew, well, here we're going to meet up with the other group. This was the wide boulevard that ran about 8 or 9 miles of straightaway through Brooklyn, and they had a security. I don't know. It was just like tape, security tape down the center, so you really couldn't cross the median. So we were stuck on the right side. That being said, the crowds were huge in Brooklyn. But I had a really big goal, of 250 for this marathon, and knowing that this wasn't just a run for fun, I was very focused. So the crowds, I really wasn't able to enjoy what people say you should do when you run the New York City Marathon, which is just go run it to enjoy it. Well, I don't know what people those are, but this was my only marathon to run hard this year. I had run Boston kind of more for fun, and this was a hard marathon. I was trying to run a 250, so I knew that it was going to take a lot of mental energy for me, and at that point I just thought that there was a distraction coming from the crowd. So of course I remember the course very well. There was music playing, people were cheering, I saw some of the signs. Since this was early on, I did enjoy it a little bit more. It was hard to jockey in and out of people still. I was very surprised at just the number of people running like a 6:35 to 6:40 pace at this point. So, that's one of the challenges of a larger marathon if you're trying to PR, is just trying to get through people. So that was a challenge. Plus, there were some rolling hills through Brooklyn. I mean, it was fairly flat, but especially towards the later, like 6, 7, 8 miles, there were some low rollers. So I felt pretty good through Brooklyn. I was keeping that 6:35, 6:40 pace. So I started to realize that 250 probably wasn't going to happen. The hills, as well as just the number of people in this race, that first mile of 7:40 really kind of shot me a little bit. But I was keeping a good, consistent pace. So we get to the end of the straightaway, and you kind of take a left, and you kind of are heading more towards Manhattan. Still really big crowds. I felt very kind of cramped in Brooklyn, and there were some places later in the miles in Brooklyn where the road was very narrow, and I told my wife after, I felt like I was running the bulls. There were bulls behind me because it was so narrow. And so you go from a little bit wider area to a bottleneck, and so you got to watch where people are. And again, those were some areas that was hard to keep a pace because you get kind of blocked in. So we end up going through Brooklyn, amazing crowds. I do remember that. And then we're about halfway there. So we're about 13 miles, and you end up on the bridge, and I don't remember the name of the bridge, but the bridge that goes from Brooklyn to Queens. And I turn, and I'm thinking, boy, that's kind of an incline. It's not a long bridge, but it definitely made me think a little. So I click off my half marathon at like 1:27:25. So I felt pretty good about that. With a goal of 250, I knew I wasn't going to hit that. Maybe 255 was a possibility. So that's okay. I wasn't worried at all. Like, the big goal for me was to PR and break 3 hours. That was one of my biggest goals, has been to break 3 hours. So I'm thinking, well, whatever. With the hills and everything in this course and the number of people, I'm going to take what I can get. So we get into Queens, come down the bridge into Queens, and you can kind of take a right and see the Queensboro Bridge looming off in the distance. Realizing that we're pretty low and that seems like we've got a ways to go uphill just to get onto the Queensboro Bridge. From what I remember about Queens, you don't run in Queens for very long. It might be 3 miles, 4 miles. I know we get to the Queensboro Bridge about mile 15. Things start to space out a little bit by then in terms of the number of people. So some really good crowds in Queens, but I remember turning left onto the Queensboro Bridge, and again, you're on the bottom deck. And I remember seeing videos and reading that it's very quiet, and you're so used to all this crowd noise the whole time. It's very quiet on the Queensboro Bridge, and it was. All you could hear were footsteps and breathing. People weren't really even talking. I was able to pass a few people, and on the incline I had like a 7:05 per minute pace, so I had to slow a little bit. And that had been my plan on these hills, these bridge hills, was to pull back a little bit, knowing that I had to conserve a little bit of energy. So I could see the crest, and I'm like making my way up to the crest, and then you kind of go down this. It seems like a longer downhill than it was uphill to the bridge. So you end up going downhill, and then you take a left turn into Manhattan, kind of come around the bridge, and then you go back underneath it and head north towards the Bronx. So we're on First Avenue in Manhattan, and this is a long straightaway again, like it was in Brooklyn. And the road, First Avenue, is very wide. It's probably 5 or 6 lanes. So we go from 2 lanes, where I was kind of very constricted, to like a 6-lane huge avenue. And with the numbers of people running at this pace, it was very easy to kind of get a knot of people by now. So I had been drinking a lot of water and early in the race, and so I continued to make sure that I was drinking water. I had taken a couple Gatorades, but the water stations were readily available like almost every mile, like they are in a lot of these big marathons. So that was really helpful. And so I regained some of my strength kind of going through up First Avenue. Knowing that, hey, we're getting kind of closer, and I think First Avenue, you kind of get to like mile 19. Mile 19, and then you go, I think it's the Willis Avenue Bridge, that, again, this is even shorter than that bridge from Brooklyn to Queens, but, again, incline, and this is when I start to feel a little twinge of, hey, I'm running out of energy, that 19, 20 mile, but I'm still okay. Running through the Bronx, we started to mentally, was thinking like, this is going to get tough. There were some little hills in the Bronx. It's not that far. I just wanted to get through the Bronx and get back into Manhattan. So kind of do some twisty, windy stuff through the Bronx. It seemed a little farther than I thought on the map. And then you go up this tiny little hill, and they're like, oh, it's the last bridge. Yeah, thanks. I've already been through enough. So through that last bridge, and then you end up coming down back into Manhattan onto Fifth Avenue. So there's a little like jut around the little park, and then you're on Fifth Avenue. And I had, again, a video I had watched. They had said that there is an incline on that mile kind of up Fifth Avenue, and the wheels were starting to feel like they might come off for me at this point. We're getting into that 20 mile, 21 mile, that bonk zone, and I have bonked a few times in marathons. This was my 8th marathon, so we've all experienced it. I mean, at least I hope some of the other people that run marathons have experienced the bonk. But I was really fighting it. So I heard somebody behind me say, because I think other people were struggling. I heard somebody behind me talking to another runner say, just keep pumping your arms, you keep going. And so I really took that mantra of just keep the arms pumping, keep them going. So I did, and you get up like mile 22, 23 through that incline, and my pace slowed down to like 7:30, I think, or something. It might have been. But I just decided, hey, don't stop, just slow down. So we get up that incline, and then you kind of jut into Central Park, and you're on, I think it's East Drive. And that's the last, there's about 2 miles of that, and there's some rollers again. So it's nice going down, I'm feeling like, hey, a good pace, and then you gotta kind of come up, and I'm like, I'm dead. My legs are dead, and I'm like, I might have to walk. So I stop, I take 2 steps, and I realize that that's not an option for me at this point. So I pick it back up again. It's the only walking I did on the whole, I took like 2 steps. I'm looking at my watch, and I'm seeing as I pass some of the mile markers where the race time is. And I'm realizing that I can't stop and walk. If I'm going to break 3 hours at this point, there's no way I can stop and walk. So I keep pumping the arms, and in my head, I face probably the toughest battle I've ever had to face, maybe in life. I don't know. Marathons are a great way to really push and see how far you can go. I just kept saying, just keep going, Nick, just keep going, keep going. The crowds helped. I felt accountable to them, so I thought, well, I can't stop now. And there weren't a lot of people walking. You know, this is a pretty decent group of athletes, so it's not like in some of the races I've been in where I've seen other people walking. Sometimes when you see that, you're like, oh, okay, well, they're walking. I can walk. That didn't enter my mind anymore. There was just no option for that. So we get to the end of Central Park, and there's an incline again, uphill onto 59th Street. And we turn the corner onto 59th, and I could see the pictures, and what happens when I get tired is my head starts to bob back like this. And that was happening to me, but I didn't really care, pumping the arms. It seemed like a really long stretch there down to Columbus Circle. Once you get down to Columbus Circle, you take a right back into Central Park. You hit that 26-mile mark just a little bit in, and then you've got that 0.2 miles left. And that 0.2 miles this time was hard. But I was able to salvage those last couple miles. I think 7:13 was one split, and then 7:04 may have been mile 26. I was in those low to mid sevens, so it wasn't completely like the wheels didn't fall off. I wasn't running like an 8:30 pace or anything like that. I had slowed. I get to that, last 0.2 miles, and I'm able to kind of pick it up, see the finish line ahead, the iconic finish line in Central Park, and the sun is shining, and I pick it up, and I end up finishing that last little bit at about a 6:45 pace. I step over that mat at the finish line, and I'm done. I had left everything out there on that course, finished with a 2:57.25. So, here's my medal. So I have 3 of these world major medals now. All of the U.S. races are done. So Chicago, Boston, and New York. Here's the latest. There we go. So I stop and start walking, and my calves are so cramped I can barely walk. A lot of these major marathons, you have a lot of walking to do. Remember Chicago, I was warned about it. Chicago, I didn't feel as bad as I felt at this race. Of course, I ran Chicago in like 3:17 too, so I think my body wasn't quite as battered as it was after this one. But my calves were locked like completely like hard as rocks. And like the whole process, you get the heat sheet and you get the medal, and then you just keep walking. And I was so thirsty, I really needed some water because I had skipped some of the last few water stations just to get finished. So I finally you get a little bag in New York that's got Gatorade in it, a water, some pretzels, like a protein shake, some other things. I got the heat sheet, and I had signed up not to have my gear shipped back to the start line. So you have the option of either having your gear, taking all your gear with you, putting it in a bag, and they'll actually bring it from the start line back to the finish line. I chose not to do that. I had done Boston. I knew how to prepare and not have to carry, have stuff shipped back. Plus, my wife was going to be there at the end with some pants for me to put on, some cover-up pants, and so I hadn't been worried about that. But I got the poncho. So there's this heavy poncho, like a lined poncho, you get as the other option if you choose not to have your stuff shipped back to the finish line. What I didn't realize is that you had to walk quite a ways to get that poncho. And I'm walking and I'm cursing, like I'm tortured by my calves at this point. Everything else felt okay. Not okay, but it felt decent enough that I could walk. And I just kept walking, and I slowed down and chugging a Gatorade, which it was like the white frost. It tasted awful. And you get to finally you see poncho, and then they split off to go collect your gear to the right, and the poncho's to the left. So I go to the left, and you got to go up this like hill, and I'm just like, mother effer. It was tough. And we get to the top of the hill. You take a left, and you got to show your wristband, because there's a wristband they give you to show for getting the poncho. I show this wristband again, and I'm done. I'm tired. I'm cranky. And I say, how much further? And he's like, not much farther. So we keep walking, and I don't know what the street on the other side, I mean, it's 5th Avenue. Is that 8th? It might be 8th Avenue. So that's 8th on the other side. So we're walking down 8th Avenue, and we end up, finally, I get my poncho, which was really nice and warm. Even though it was a sunny day in the 50s, it was kind of breezy. And I finally find a park bench kind of on the Central Park side, and I sit down for a couple minutes just to give me some relief of these calves, and it did help. I get up and walk a little bit further, but I had to sit down again just for a minute, get up. My wife's texting me, and I actually brought my phone with me for the first time for a marathon. I had put it in my undershorts. I had bought some undershorts that specifically had like a really tight pocket that an iPhone would fit in very nicely, and I had practiced with that in some of my runs earlier before the race, and it worked very well. So I had my cell phone. I had turned it off during the race. I didn't want to be bothered if somebody would text me or call me. But I turned it back on. My wife had watched me right near Columbus Circle, but her phone was almost dead, and she was having a difficult time kind of letting me know where we were going to meet. Luckily, we were able to kind of figure that out, and I texted her that I was a few blocks away. I still had like 4 blocks to go to see her. And finally, I get down there where the public can kind of get in, and I see her and give her a big hug. And by then, my calves had started to feel better, and I put my warm-up pants on, and I had my poncho on, and we walked, we had about 7 more blocks to walk back to the hotel. But by the time we kind of were out of the marathon area, walking back towards the hotel, my calves had loosened up quite a bit. So even though I had cursed so much that mile walk, apparently, that's what I heard later, it's like a mile after the race, it really did help kind of loosen those up. So we get back to our hotel and walk in, and the concierge is to the right, and the concierge people start clapping. There's a lot of people in the lobby, and everybody starts clapping for me because I was the only marathoner coming in. It was still fairly early with that 2:57:25 time. There weren't a lot of people that had shown up from the marathon yet. So that was really cool to get like an ovation like that in the lobby of the hotel. So after that, up to our room, and my wife ran out and got a smoothie for me while I kind of took a shower and then figured out kind of what we wanted to do for food. We ended up going out like an hour maybe later for food, and I ended up getting we got an Impossible Burger, and it was great. So got back to the room. Well, actually, we had dinner, and then we were a few blocks from Times Square, and so my wife and I walked down Times Square that night. And we're just kind of walking around a little bit, and I looked at her and I said, I'm ready to go back to the room. I was beat. That race took everything out of me. I had no energy left. It was kind of a cool night in terms of the temperature, and I had 45,000 steps for that day. So we walked back to our hotel, and that was it. I pretty much hunkered down for the night, and that was a wrap. So we flew home the next day, and everything went fine with our flight. It was great. We got home by like 4:30 or 5 o'clock the next night, and I had taken another day off of work to recover. The normal things like going downstairs for a couple of days were a little difficult, but it's Friday. It's 5 days after the race. I feel pretty good. Taking it kind of easy. I have not run it all yet. I have run the day after marathons in the past, and I felt like that had really helped, but I didn't have the energy this time. Plus, running in New York City the day after the marathon, I just didn't want to go through that. So my plan is tomorrow, Saturday. My plan is to run a little bit in the morning, maybe 4 miles, just really easy to see how I feel. But a huge success, new PR. Hanson's plan worked again. The one thing I will say is that I think I've finally hit my limit with the Hanson's plan, and I think that I really need to focus on some higher mileage type programs if I want to get a little bit better. I think I need to be running 70 or 80 miles if I want to be able to get to that 250 or 245 mark. Now that I've broken 3, my goal is to try to get back down at some point and break 250. Ultimately, 245 would be a dream. But I'm 40 years old, so I realize that my time frame for hitting those kind of numbers is probably limited to the next 5 years before I start kind of on that decline down. But again, thank you for watching. I really, again, as I did for Boston, which is an iconic race, so is this one, and I really would recommend to anybody that wants to run one of these big marathons. New York is an awesome race. The crowds are great. Run it for time, run it for fun, run it however you want to run it. Just enjoy it and enjoy the whole experience of New York City. That's it for me tonight. Good night.